The planning meeting is being broadcast live over the internet and will be available to view online now and in the future. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Those attending in the chamber, please be aware that we are all on camera and you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking. And please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. Committee members participating remotely, can you please refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. And please remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. Right, we'll move on to the agenda. Agenda item 1, attendance and apologies. Geraint, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Ron Burnett.
Thank you. Right, item agenda 2, declarations of interest. Geraint, could you please ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any interest to declare?
No problem, Chair. If I can start with Councillor Ashley, please.
It looks like I've got planning item 7, which is Victoria Street, Old Cwmbran. That's because of my membership of Cwmbran Council. So that would be non-prejudicial personal.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan?
No, none. Geraint.
Thank you. Councillor Constance?
No interests.
Councillor Crick?
No interest, thank you, Geraint.
Councillor Evans?
Yeah, item 4 and 6, you mentioned the World Heritage Site, which I'm supposed to sit on their committee on behalf of the Beacons. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Horler?
Nothing to declare.
Councillor Gaynor James?
Yes, can I declare interest in items number 4 and 5 as being a member of Pontypool Community Council?
Thank you. Councillor Keith James?
Yes, likewise. Listen to items 4 and 5, a personal interest as a member of Pontypool.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins?
Nothing to declare.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fay Jones?
Agenda item 7, same as Councillor Ashley, because I sit on the Cwmbran Community Council. Personal non.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Janet Jones?
No, but I am aware of agenda item 6 because it's in my ward and I have responded to planning regarding that one. So I just ask under a personal or a prejudicial, just that it's in my ward.
Right, okay, thank you. Right, I think Councillor O'Connell's joined me. Councillor O'Connell?
Nothing to declare.
Thank you. Yourself, Chair?
Yes, I'd like to declare non-prejudicial interest on agenda items 4 and 5 as a member of Pontypool Community Council.
Okay, thanks. I don't think Councillor Rapier has joined the meeting. I can't see her on the list of attendees. So is Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, just a personal interest on agenda item 7 as it's in my ward.
Right, thank you. That's everyone, Chair.
Thank you, Geraint. Right, we'll move on to agenda item 3, minutes of the Planning Committee from the 14th of October. Members, could you possibly state whether you have anything to raise in relation to the minutes? If not, I will take them as approved. Anyone want to say anything? No? Right, we'll take those as approved. Thank you. Agenda item 4. Planning application 21//0639/OUT, development of up to 53 new houses, including affordable housing, public open space and country footpaths at land west of Warteg Road, Warteg, Pontypool. Can I ask Rebecca Andrews, Principal Planner, to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'll just share my presentation. Bear with me.
Right, thank you.
There we go. Okay, good morning. This is an application for 53 dwellings with all matters reserved at land at Bartig Road, Bartig Pontypool. There's quite a bit of planning history on this site. In 2011, outline consent for the 53 dwellings at the site was allowed to appeal. Then in 2015, we granted consent to extend this permission. An application for reserved matters for the scheme was received in 2017. That was subsequently withdrawn before determination. So I should stress there are no current consents on this land. Last year we gave pre-app advice for this development, and at that time we advised the developers that the principle of development of the 53 houses at this site was considered acceptable. However, in February of this year, the new planning policy, national planning policy was introduced, and PPW 11 and Future Wales. This introduced a stronger emphasis on sustainable places and placemaking. And whilst the site is located within the urban boundary, we are concerned that Bartig is an isolated settlement with few localities. There's a pub, a Welsh school and community hall, but all other facilities, including shops, are some distance away. And therefore we're concerned about location. As part of the new LDP, a sustainable settlement appraisal was undertaken, which scored Bartig very low. So Cwmbran scored 100 because it was the highest settlement within the borough. And by comparison, Bartig scored 6%. So you can see as a comparison to Cwmbran how poor it scores on the sustainability assessment. PPW is all about development in the right location and minimising the need to travel. That's all part of the new sort of placemaking agenda. The construction of 53 dwellings in an isolated small community with a severe lack of facilities is not sustainable or placemaking and goes against PPW 12 and Future Wales, PPW 11, sorry, Future Wales. We're therefore recommending the refusal of the application on this basis. We're concerned about the development in the face of sustainability.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I've got another bit, sorry.
Sorry, I thought
sorry. I'm trying to... There we go. So there's a second reason for refusal as well, and that's the impact upon the character and appearance of the area. So this is the site layout, which is an indicative layout because it's an outline consent. The appeal, which I spoke about earlier, was allowed on the basis that a good standard of design, which would assimilate the development to the wider environment, would be provided, as the site is a key route into the World Heritage Site. So this is the layout submitted by the applicants. We're happy with the terrace approach. So in terms of that indicative design, that's fine. Maintaining and sort of rerouting the public rights of way through the site, which is fine, and parking would be in rear court, so the car would dominate the street scene. So we're satisfied with these aspects of the proposed development, and that it would respond to the terraces in Salisbury Terrace and Pembroke Terrace. So we're happy with that. However, we are concerned about the levels across the site. So between Bartig Road and the rear of the site, there's an 8-metre difference in levels. And a key issue of the Reserved Matters application, which I mentioned was withdrawn a couple of years ago, was how those levels could be adequately dealt with within the scheme without needing quite drastic retaining structures or alterations in the ground level, which would affect the character and appearance of the area and change the levels across the site quite drastically. When we gave pre-app advice, which I mentioned back last year, we advised that levels across the site should not be significantly altered. The current application lacks details of how the levels could be sensitively dealt with as part of this proposal. Indicative section drawings through the site have been requested, but the applicants have declined to provide these. We wanted sort of sections running through Bartig Road up through to the rear, so we could see how that would sit within the landscape. The conservation officer and landscape officer have raised concerns about the scheme on the basis of the lack of information submitted in respect of these levels. Given that this isn't a sensitive site and there's a lack of information to satisfy us and sort of address our concerns about the levels, we have to assume that the site would not be able to accommodate those levels and would be harmful to the wider environment. So therefore, we're recommending refusal also on the basis of the harm to the character and appearance of the area and the surrounding landscape. Finally, we're also recommending refusal on the basis of surface water drainage. So a drainage strategy was submitted as part of the scheme, but the council's drainage engineer advises it would not meet current SUD standards. PPW advises councils should ensure sustainable drainage systems are an integral part of the site design, and the indicative drainage system strategy fails to demonstrate a satisfactory SUD scheme could be achieved at the site. Therefore, we're recommending refusal also on this basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I haven't seen any hands going up for questions. Have you seen any, Geraint?
No, and they're in. Oh, no, you got Councillor Jenkins now.
Yes, Gwyn.
Hi, good morning. First question I'd like to ask is that I know you're recommending refusal for this. What do you think the options are if they appeal against it and it's going to cost this council thousands of pounds again? That's my first question. If you could answer that for me, please. Thank you.
Well, I assume you're referring to if there was a cost application, if we refused the application, it went to appeal. I think that in order to be able to claim costs, the council has to have acted unreasonably. Whilst we gave advice last year at pre-app stage to say that the principle of development was acceptable, there's been quite a clear shift in national planning policy since that time, and I think we've got quite a very strong case that this site is not sustainable. It just goes against the grain of all the current national planning thinking where we're going with the LDP. So yeah, I think that the chances of that are limited.
Right, can I come back in, Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that answer, because I don't want a situation, or we don't want a situation where it goes against the council again, like it did in Cumbrae bus station, you know, because at the end of the day, times are tight and we don't need to fork out hundreds of thousands of pounds on appeals. Thank you for that answer. It's allayed a lot of my fears. Thank you.
Right, Janet.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Rebecca. More or less answered my questions. I mean, I have concerns about the impact that this would have being on the edge of the World Heritage Site, and also the impact it would have on Vartig as it is. As you say, it's a small community, and I have got concerns if this went through, the impact it would have on the schools, the doctor's surgeries as well, and obviously I'm concerned about the impact on the environment that it would have. So I thank you for your report.
Right, thank you, Janet. Stuart?
Like Steve Evans, I was the former member on the Brecon Beacons Authority, and if you take the view that we're butting to that authority, I'm glad you've come round to this view, to be quite honest, because Janet's just said it about there's an isolated estate, because that's exactly what this would be, on top of a mountain, looking over a World Heritage Site. It doesn't bear thinking about, to be quite frank. It's a lovely design. It would be a nice thing if it wasn't up there. And I go up and down that road quite often on a bus. There is a bus route, and it goes up and down there, but it's the middle of nowhere. And the next stop up there is the cemetery, and the next stop down the other way. And it is what it is up there, and you say it very well indeed in your report. Thank you. I just wonder why anybody ever thought of putting something up there, because that landscape is very precious, and it's one of the few we've got like that. And if that was up the Beacons, they'd go mad. And in terms of landscape directive, style of landscape, that is a World Heritage Site for a reason. Steve, please come here and rescue me. No, he's more up to date on this than I am, but there's two tans up two reasons the beacons have it, and we have it on this bit of landscape. Steve, please come and rescue me on this. But I'm trying to say is that particular landscape, if you sit on a bus high up and look over there, you'll see reason why it's there. Thank you, Steve, you're there. I understand that it's a useful site for things, but not there, please. And I totally support this refusal, to be quite honest, on that basis. Also, there's a lot that, although our ecologists don't say it, the actual nothingness there is what the site's about. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Stuart.
Could you reflect on that, if you would, please, Rebecca? Because you've done a good job. But I just want to hear you reflect on that again.
Of course, yeah. I mean, you've picked up on the key point there that the bus route past the site is quite good. So, but inevitably, because it's such an isolated community with so few facilities, you know, it's gonna generate quite a good level of cardboard or private journeys, which planning policy is directing us against. We're trying to avoid development which encourages car journeys at the moment, so that's a good point. In terms of the World Heritage Site and the impact upon that, I should go back and sort of reiterate that we did recommend refusal back in 2011 on the basis of the impact on the World Heritage Site, and we actually lost that appeal on the basis that the put forward the inspector was that the ANCAP was forward a scheme which they argued sort of assimilate within to the landscape, which is the terraces and pretty much that layout that we just looked at. But at that point, the level hadn't been looked into properly, and through the Reserved Matters application, which we dealt with for a couple of years ago, when we started looking at the levels with the applicants at that point, it was really difficult to achieve. I think the original Reserved Matters application that we had in, they had a 4-metre high wall across the front onto Barwick Road. Now this scheme isn't suggesting that it would have to do that. I think they're suggesting it would be sort of a crib block, smaller approach there, and we're fairly okay with that, but there's just an absence of information in terms of how those levels would be successfully dealt with, and without that information, it'd be very difficult for us to recommend, say that we were okay with the impact on the character and appearance. As I said, we asked the applicants as part of the application to provide that, and they haven't done so. So yeah, it leaves us with no choice really.
Can I just add one other point, which is a very minor one, but an interesting one? If you are on the X24 bus and it decides to terminate at night, which it does, relatives of mine that live in Blaenavon have had to walk that road from Varteg over to Blaenavon, and it's one of the few bits of dark sky we've got in the whole borough. So just showing, it does have to bring up the fact that is quite isolated up there. And that 2 mile stretch from there to there is very, very isolated. It's one of the few places in the whole boroughs outside going up the woods or mountains, it's like that on the main road.
It's a beautiful location.
Yeah.
Right, okay, Stuart?
Yeah.
Steve, you're next on the list.
Let's see the day again. Under the police planning, you're absolutely correct, because where it's situated is not the right place. I mean, on the beacon sort of thing, they'd be looking at the tans, they'd be looking at the historical, they'd be looking at the heritage. I mean, not only that, there's the SUDS, there's other issues within the community, and that's the things we're looking at. It's not about the actual design and the build, it's the other things that incorporate this build. And I think, you're right in what you're saying, under the police planning, under the historical part, that, we need to look at it on that. And I agree with what other people have said, particularly what Stuart has said. But the beacons would be looking exactly the same sort of thing as we are today with this. Yeah.
Right, thank you, Steve. There's someone in the chamber. Is it you, Gaynor? Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would just like to move this recommendation for refusal.
Right, thank you. Gwyn wants to speak first before we go ahead. We're looking for a seconder. Gwyn?
Right, yeah, I'll second that, but if I can have my Stuart, I know everything you said was correct, right? But at one time, there was a lot of houses up the top of the Bardic, and I mean, an hell of a lot. But times have changed. You've got the European, Blenavon now is part of it all now, and now this is the edge of it. And I think because times have changed, and obviously I live 500 yards from this area, and I think you're right that we should refuse this, and I will second it.
Right, thank you, Gwyn. Right, I can see Jason O'Connor's hand up. Would you like to come in, Jason?
Yeah, just a very quick point, please, Chair. I know Rebecca said that she asked for information that the applicant didn't provide. I'm disappointed to say that the applicant still proceeded to chance his arm a little bit with coming to this committee without providing that information. So I think it's right that we refuse it. We have a planning process in place for a purpose, and if our planning team ask for information, it's not because they feel like it, it's because they need it to make a just assessment. So for anybody watching or listening to this who thinks that they can chance their arm a little bit and bring it to committee without satisfying our planning team's requirements, I think the message is think again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Right, I can't see any other hands up. Geraint, could you please ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they are for, against, or are abstaining? And of course, the for vote is for refusal.
Thank you, Chair. If I can start with Councillor Ashley.
For.
Councillor Bevan.
For.
Councillor Constance.
For.
Councillor Crick.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Horler.
For.
Councillor Gaynor James.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Keith James.
For.
Councillor Jenkins.
For.
Councillor Faye Jones.
For.
Councillor Janet Jones.
For.
Councillor O'Connell.
For.
Councillor Parish.
For.
And Councillor Thomas.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Right. This planning application has been refused. Right, we go on to agenda item 5. Planning application 21/P/0670 FUL. Change of use to a 5-bed HMO use class 4 station house, 1 Station Street, Abersacan, Pontypool. This application was deferred from the last meeting for a site inspection, and the site inspection took place on the 2nd of November. Can I ask Claire Hall, Senior Planner, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. We went through the presentation last committee. I don't know if members want to see it again. The only update to the report is the background section on page 40 of the agenda. Members will recall they were a bit concerned about some of the details about the living arrangements for the proposed house in multiple occupation. So following last month's planning committee, our council's HMO licensing officer for environmental health did a detailed inspection report, identified some issues that require some enforcement from that side of things, because there's a separate licensing application as well as on site to look at the surroundings of what was there in terms of parking and bin storage, etc. So the recommendation, as it was last month, is for approval, and there's no other updates to the report other than what's in the background section from last time. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Jason, is your hand still up from last time, or do you have a question?
No question from me, Chair.
Oh, thank you. Hugh?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I've read the report. Just of a slight concern, and I think this has been raised by others, was around the possible impact it would have on parking. That's the only slight concern I've got with it.
Right. Would the Highways officer like to come in on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We share a concern about car parking, and it was evident when we went on the site inspection that the car park at certain times is fairly full. I think there were probably 2 or 3 spare spaces in that car park. But what you have to bear in mind, I think, is that there would have been a normal dwelling house there anyway, and the residents from that property would have had to park somewhere. And the HMO is in operation now, and the residents from that would park somewhere. They may park in the car park adjacent to the site, or the other place they could park is Union Street car park, which is quite a substantial car park, which is only 100 metres away. So, I mean, I share your concerns about car parking, but this is a HMO with limited vehicular use. It wouldn't be the same as a very large dwelling. So we didn't oppose the application from a highway standpoint. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, right. Veronica, I've got on the list next.
Thank you, Chair. It's a point of information, really. I'm not familiar with HMOs and their requirements, but I notice on page 40 it refers to the facilities for drying clothes, and I've picked up that we are saying that there should be an area outside, a line for that of some kind. It then goes on to say the requirements, it's suitable for up to 5 occupants. Presumably that needs to be adhered to. It then talks below there that if there are more than 4 occupants, they have 2 fridge freezers or equivalent, which makes sense to me. What I don't see anywhere, and presumably it's not required, is talk of laundry facilities, in other words, a washing machine. Is that the case? As I say, I'm not familiar with HMO requirements, and I wondered if Claire could explain that to us, please.
Could you come in, Claire?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm not familiar with the detailed HMO requirements myself, other than there are two separate issues going on here. There's a planning application, so in terms of the planning requirements from a policy and a local plan requirement, there are requirements for clothes drying facilities, bin storage and parking are sort of the 3 general criteria, because they affect the sort of external environment and how a development exists on the ground. On top of that, then, because they need to apply for a licence to operate as a HMO, there are additional requirements to satisfy that separate legislation, and that does go down into detail in terms of how much they've got in terms of facilities for washing, for cooking, cupboard space, how big their cupboards are, all that sort of thing, which is a level of detail that planning would never go drill down that far. Based on the inspection report that our environmental health officer did, the way it is currently, they've said it's suitable for up to 5 occupants, but with certain modifications, which they're working with the owners on, I understand. Actually, the property is large enough to accommodate between 6 and 10 occupants. Okay, so as it sits presently, my understanding is that the property is suitable for up to 5, but with certain arrangements in terms of cupboard space, fridge freezers, that sort of thing. It could be anything between 6 and 10. So it depends what modifications they make internally and how far they want to go in that regard. Now, one thing that may come to members' mind is why, as planning, we're not restricting it to 5 occupants. Well, the reason for that is because there's a separate legislative requirement that controls how many people can go in there. From a planning point of view, we wouldn't tell people living in that family dwelling how many children they could have. You know, that would be could be a family living in there with, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children. You know, it's the use of the building that planning concerns itself with. So the report, the background information, if you like, is the more detail that members were asking for last time, based on the concerns that certainly local ward members had raised, because I think one of the tenants who were in there had obviously gone to them with cause for complaint, and that is being investigated by our HMO officer, and the owner is working, I understand, in tandem with them to put right the things that need to be done so that they can increase the occupation of the building in a way that satisfies that separate legislative regime. But the closed drying is a specific requirement of a local planning policy in terms of things that the HMO licence would look at, in the same way as, like I said, they look at the fridge freezer space, the kitchen cupboard space, the bedroom sizes, etc. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. Stuart, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. A couple of I realised where this was. I've actually cycled past it in the past. The other thing is, in terms of having pardon me a minute, just get rid of that. I'm in the middle of planning. I'll see you in a minute. Sorry about that. The actual place is actually Abersuckham Village. So you know that we were talking about the X24 bus that goes straight through Abersuckham Village. So it's actually probably the best bus route in the borough in terms of transport. So I couldn't get to site visit last week because we had a bus strike. But that's neither here nor there. But it does give you, normally this is a very well connected place. So I'm not sure about being concerned about car parking with this type of accommodation we got on this. That was one observation I was going to make. The other one is that I lived in this sort of accommodation 30 years ago when I lived in Cardiff and Bristol quite a lot. So this isn't anything I'm not seeing. And I was concerned when we asked for the site visit to see what it, because I didn't get there were 2 toilets in it, and bathroom type suites, because if you live in an HMO and you've got this number of people, 1 toilet suite, 1 bathroom is of a great concern. And if you're a student, you're used to sharing this sort of accommodation is what most students in Cardiff, Bristol, etc. live in. So it is what it is. It's this type of accommodation. You're right, licensing the stuff for people to live in it is not, I don't think it's a concern of planning. But what does worry me, and do we have a concern for it? Is the fire safety and that sort of thing, or is that still part of licensing? And obviously circulation areas in buildings like this, is that us or is that licensing? Because having lived in this type of accommodation, it's converted accommodation. There's quite a lot that the people that are converting this for use, and you say, oh, it's 6 at the moment, it could be 10, and this is a massive, great house looking at it. That is the stuff that concerns me sitting on the planning committee, and having lived in this accommodation, it's what makes it habitable. The other thing is, each of these bed sits, right, has a lock on them, and they're rented like that. That's part of their licensing thing, is then what the common space is, i.e. toilets, kitchens, and possibly lounges. How does it work in this particular accommodation? It's that type of HMO. Or do people actually have in their rooms, like students do, other things? I don't know. I don't see that in this application.
Claire, could you answer that, please?
I think in terms of the bus route and the sustainable and the lack of parking, I mean, that's all in the report. That was what was debated last month, really, from a planning point of view. Sorry?
We didn't discuss bus transport, but I know, having looked at that, we got that.
Yeah, no, but it's in the report as to why the lack of parking does not seem to be an issue on this particular site. Yeah. In terms of the fire safety, it's a combination of the HMO licence and or building regulations. Again, in terms of means of escape and fire doors and all that sort of thing, is all covered by that separate legislative consenting regime. In terms of how this particular property works, I've not been inside the property myself, but based on the video footage I've seen and the report that our environmental health officer has produced, they do seem to be individually locked bedrooms with shared communal areas, so that they share a living space, they share a kitchen space, and they share the bathrooms.
Thank you, Claire. That's very common if you live in lots of HMOs, and ask most of the HMOs in Cardiff, Bristol, and Newport. Thank you very much indeed. That's all the information I needed.
Right, thank you, Stuart. Janet, you're next on the list.
Sorry. I think that we ought to, bearing in mind that we've had a site meeting and all the questions raised by the HMO, Claire was able to advise that this was under another policy. I think that we should go with a recommendation and approve this application with conditions. Obviously, if there are any other concerns on HMO licences, this will come under another committee.
Yes, you're right, Janet. Right, I got two speakers, Faye and then Gwyn. Faye, would you like to ask your question?
I am a little bit concerned that we will delegate some of this, because it's not under planning laws, to another committee in case they think differently to us, because we've just refused some houses in an area which is very beautiful, and I understand completely why we've done that. But when you live many people together in one house, it causes such a lot of problems. So I think when we're planning for a HMO, we have to be even more careful than when we're planning for an ordinary house. Because, for instance, in my area where I'm a county councillor, we have some shared facilities, not exactly HMOs, but some people live in semi-sheltered accommodation, and there's always arguments over who's going to use the line for drying. There's always concerns over who lives below you. When you then share bathrooms and toilets, you make life even more difficult, so it affects the community and it affects all those people, possibly affects their health. So I just think we've got to be really, really careful about the facilities that are provided and how much space there is per person, or otherwise I feel we're sort of dumbing life down in a sense. So I feel we have to really dot the I's and cross the T's when it comes to HMO. Thank you.
I think that's being done, Faye, in fairness to the officers. I mean, it has to go to licensing. It's not another committee. It's the licensing authority within our council.
Can I come back in this?
Yes.
So just on that point, I think it's important, and I completely understand your concerns, and all the things that you said are the experience of what happens in real life with shared facilities. But I have to remind you that the planning process, you have to determine your planning applications in accordance with your local development plan policies. Now, your current local plan policy, H6, has criteria for clothes drying space, has criteria for bin storage, has criteria for parking. It does not specify minimum room sizes. It does not specify a certain number of bedrooms per or bathrooms per occupiers. Now, that is something you could choose to do in your new plan, for example. And if you've got a local plan policy that lists that criteria in more detail, you then could justifiably determine a planning application against that criteria. And if you think it's falling short, you'd have a good cause for turning it down. The problem you've got here is that the local plan policy is more sort of high level, really. So it talks about things in the general rather than the nitty gritty. So we have to rely on the separate licensing regime to dot the I's and cross those T's, as you put it. So as it currently stands, you'd have no grounds to refuse it planning permission. You may find that there are grounds under the HMO licensing. It's fallen short on that, but that wouldn't be a reason for withholding planning permission. Your planning application for a HMO can only be determined against the policies in our local plan. And the local plan policy, as far as we're concerned, as set out in the report, where it falls down is on parking. But from a planning point of view, we don't think that's harmful for the reasons that we've set out in terms of available parking, the fallback position of it being used as a single family dwelling, plus the fact it's very sustainably located with access to alternative travel means. So it doesn't comply fully with H6, but there are good reasons why it not fully complying with H6 doesn't mean that we should refuse it planning permission, and that is what the report sets out. The concerns that you've set out in terms of people fighting over washing lines, completely understand all that, but that is beyond the realm of the land use planning system, sorry.
Could I just come back there? You did mention that possibly it could go up to 6 or 10. That's when I got really concerned. Or is it going to be for 5?
We wouldn't control the number of occupants from a planning point of view. That's the issue. As it stands at the moment, the environmental health officer's advice is that the property is suitable for up to 5, but that the space is there to accommodate between 6 and 10. So the building is big enough to accommodate between 6 and 10, but at the moment the facilities and the layout would only allow it to be occupied by 5. Now, again, I come back to the fact that if they wanted to, they could then make those modifications internally to satisfy the HMO licensing criteria to increase their occupation. That would be a matter for them. As it stands at the moment, if they made no alterations to the building as it is, the HMO officer's advice would be that they would only license it for up to 5. But I couldn't say to you that it would never go beyond that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Claire. Gwyn, you are next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Right, Claire, am I right in saying that this is a retrospective planning application? Because didn't you tell us on site that they're already using it as a HMO or whatever?
We weren't aware that it was retrospective until post last planning committee. We were only aware that it was occupied by one individual, and one individual wouldn't have constituted a breach of planning control. So it was only after the last planning committee, when we looked into it further, were we aware that there was actually a second householder that had been leased there. So yes, it is part retrospective in that regard.
What I can't understand there is that if they haven't done all these modifications, how is they using it as this hostel? And another thing is like my main concern is, again, is parking. Local residents have said to me that you know, it's all right to say, well, none of them may have cars, but at the end of the day, what if 5 people have the cars in there? But, you know, and the other point was, I think you told me that it's nothing to do with planning, is access with the payment. You won't get as I showed you at the site meeting. But, you know, if it's retrospective, I think something should have been done to stop it being retrospective, because we seem to be doing this all over Torfaen, don't we? Thanks, Claire.
Do you want me to come back on any of those points, or?
Well, you could comment on what I have asked.
Okay. I don't think I would have said it's nothing to do with planning that the pavement's narrow. I think the issue is that the pavement is narrow, and that's a fact, and the building could be occupied. The issue that was raised at the site visit was that it's unsuitable for people pushing a pram, and the point was made that, well, the lawful use of the building at the moment is a single dwelling. We would have no control over a family moving in there today or tomorrow, and they may have babies in a pram. So we can't do anything about that. That's a matter of fact. So we have to consider that as what's called, in planning terms, a fallback position. Okay, so on that basis, we as officers think it would be unreasonable to say that it shouldn't be used as a HMO, just in case it's occupied by somebody with a baby in a pram who can't navigate the pavement. That's point number one. Point number two, in terms of the parking, I think we've been through this. We've exhausted the issue. Members can agree or disagree with what officers' views are on that. That's a matter for members. It doesn't comply with the policy, which does require on-site parking to be provided, but we've explained why we think that's okay in this particular circumstance. In terms of the retrospective argument, as again came up on the site visit, nothing annoys local people more than the fact that people are not applying by the rules. And unfortunately, retrospective planning applications are part and parcel of planning life. And whether you like it or not, we have to deal with it as such. If it's harmful to planning, then we would enforce against it. If it's not harmful for planning, it wouldn't be something that we would take action against. In terms of somebody being in there in breach of their licensing arrangements, we would be expecting the HMO licensing side of things to enforce against the requirements in that regard. If planning permission is refused today, then obviously we would have to look at that from a planning enforcement and an expediency point of view. But in the first case, we would possibly have to deal with an appeal. And to go back to the last item where you were talking about your chances of success, in this particular case, as officers, we recommended very strongly that there's no reason to withhold planning permission for this use.
Right. Thank you, Claire. Okay, Gwyn?
Yes, yeah, fine. Thank you, Claire.
Right. Hugh, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick things, please. Claire, you mentioned that the difference, obviously, between what the planning committee can determine and what the licensing committee determines, but you came up with a suggestion as well that going forward, this could be something that could be considered in the LDP. Now, well, I like Councillor Crick, I'm not sure exactly what comes under the licensing committee for these type of properties. So if that aspect, well, I guess what I wanted to ask was, well, that aspect that you mentioned, would that be covered by the licensing committee, or is that something that perhaps we can look to include in the new LDP going forward? That was the first question, just a bit of clarification on that, because I think that would be a good suggestion, what you recommended there, and I think that is something that we should look at going forward. And just on one of the conditions, picking up on the point that I think Glyn made, that it was already in use as an HMO. One of the conditions on page 48 says, condition 4, prior to the development being brought into beneficial use, the existing front boundary wall should be taken down and a new pedestrian gate installed in accordance with the details first submitted. Now, given that it's already in use as an HMO, when is that going to be done? That'll have to be done straight away, won't it?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Some excellent points there. In terms of the first point, yes, I was referring to the LDP process. So when you review your local plan, as I'm sure you're all aware, it's quite a long process in terms of all the issues that you have to take into account. But as well as identifying sites and where you want development to happen and where you don't want a development to happen, you are entitled to have detailed policy considerations that identify or set out your expectations for particular types of development. So, for example, if you thought that this was becoming an increasing issue in the county borough, it is within your gift to instruct the planning policy team as part of their LDP review to look at that in more detail. When we're dealing with planning applications, we look to the LDP for a framework and for guidance in how we deal with those planning applications. And if I had a policy that criteria said for every 5 rooms of multiple occupation you have to have X, Y and Z facilities, we could then make sure that that is delivered on a planning side of things. Okay, we can't obviously stray into areas where it's covered by other legislation, but the principal point is that the criteria-based policy could be more detailed than it is presently, and that is something as members you could take forward in the replacement local plan. In terms of the conditions, excellent point, and you've referenced condition 4, but actually there's other conditions as well, which say prior to development. I'm happy to amend the wording of those conditions to make it clear that needs to be done within a certain period of time. What we tend to do is with enforcement cases, if we know it's an enforcement case, we wouldn't word it like that. So prior to commencement, we would say something along the lines that unless within 3 months of the date of this permission, these things haven't been done, then the use of the development that is being approved will no longer have consent, she'll cease basically. It's a way for us to enforce the conditions better than a prior to development. So completely take that on board. It wouldn't just be condition 4, it would be all the conditions that say prior to development. We would just tweak the wording to require them to do that within probably a 3-month period, because what we're asking them to do is not significant. So there's no reason why they should need to take a long time to make those modifications. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Claire.
thank you, Claire. I think the conditions should be amended, as you've just suggested, to stipulate a time frame by which they have to be completed. So basically, I would support the recommendation for the approval with the conditions, with the newly amended conditions to say it's got to be done within a certain time frame. And just on the point that you made about us looking at it and exploring it in the LDP, how would we take that forward? Would that be perhaps a recommendation from the chair of this committee, or would it have to be something that would be done in full council by all members? I'm not quite sure how we could progress that other point that you talked about.
I'll probably ask the head of planning policy to come in at this point, Rich.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. We are looking at that, Councillor. It is going to be something that will be part of the LDP process. The next stage in that is to bring a deposit plan to you with suggested policies, and members will have the opportunity to debate those policies. So yes, you will get an opportunity through that process.
Thank you both.
Could I come in on that? Because I did put my hand up just then, Chair.
Yes, you are next on my list.
Yeah, no, I've taken up Hugh's very useful point there. Thank you for that, Hugh. We have had housing policy meetings with Councillor Daniels in his brief. Is it possible that, because that does, to my mind, and I'm obviously in another way a scrutiny chair, is that possible to look at that with the housing and the licensing together, possibly as I don't know whether it's a suitable one for a seminar or something like that, or even as part of Councillor Daniels' housing policy? I know it's an LDP thing, but it's actually a wider brief than that, isn't it?
Well, who would like to answer that?
Yeah,
Richard, that's right.
I'll come in there, Chair. Yeah, I can certainly go back and check on that. If members want a seminar on HMOs, then yes, I can look into that, certainly.
I think well, the discussion that certainly we've all had round this is obviously we've got a planning thing we're looking at here, but it's mentioned licensing, it's mentioned HMO policy, which is Councillor Daniels' brief on the Executive Committee. It's mentioned a whole lot of things here. It's something it probably needs a wider consideration.
Right, okay, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your indulgence on that one.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, I got Faye and then Veronica.
Could I just make a statement on what Claire said earlier about if people move in before planning or things get activated, it's just part of planning, it's something we've got to put up with. It's happened in my area and it's being dealt with at the moment, apparently, although I know very little about it, with a HMO. But the residents in my area are white hot with anger that some people can get away without planning permission and other people can't. And it sort of seems to me that we're dulling things down when we allow that to happen. Thank you.
Do you want to answer that, Claire, or shall I ask Richard to?
I'm not sure what I can say other than, planning enforcement. We only enforce against breaches of planning control which are contrary to what we would grant planning permission for. So people who jump the gun obviously do so at their own risk. But if ultimately what they are doing is compliant with our planning policy, then we wouldn't, there's no requirement on them to make a planning application. It would be the authorities' role from an enforcement point of view to investigate that and decide whether it was expedient to take action against them. Now, in my experience, we don't take action against developments that we would ordinarily grant planning permission for, because that is not how planning enforcement is meant to function. It's not about punishing individuals for being chancers, if you like, and taking a risk. It's about upholding the policies that we seek to implement and only enforcing against the ones that fall foul of those, which, as I've said, in terms of the report, subject to them making those modifications to the bin storage and clothes drying bits and pieces, what they've done here doesn't breach what we're looking to do from a planning point of view.
Chair, sorry, can I?
Sorry, go on. Carry on. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I was just going to add. Yeah, pardon me. I'm just going to add that I appreciate the concerns from members over this, and it does happen, and it does seem unfair. It's been raised previously by members of the planning committee, not necessarily this planning committee, but a previous planning committee, and the members particularly wanted us to write to Welsh Government expressing those concerns, which we did at that time, but obviously because it is in legislation, there's very little we can do in terms of any sort of punishment on that. We can rectify the breach, but we can't, just because somebody does implement something without planning permission, it's not in itself an offence. But as I say, we have communicated our concerns and committee's concerns to Welsh Government in the past.
Thank you. I'm just worried that more people might chance their arm, which is very worrying.
Well, we haven't got any control over that, really, have we, Faye? Unless someone lets the planners know that something's going on in their area, they wouldn't know about it. Do you know what I mean? It's quite difficult, actually. Anyway, we'll move on. Veronica?
Thank you, Chair. This is all part and parcel, really, of the conversations that have just been taking place. I note what is said about the replacement LDP review. I do think that it would be helpful for members, for us all to understand as members, and this is going forward into next year as well, given there may well be changes with the council, but just what HMOs are all about, because we don't fully appreciate it, I think most of us, and we do need that clarification. I'm wondering, for example, if we could know what happens elsewhere, thinking of Newport and Cardiff, where you've got, as Stuart has pointed out, and as many of us know, a large student population who perhaps have different requirements to what we might have further up the valleys for HMOs, in terms of the type of people who might be wanting to have those. I think it would be useful too if David Daniels, as the cabinet member, could be involved in perhaps arranging something like this, so that we have that extra information, so that when people are presented with this type of application, they already have that background knowledge. So I'd like to move that we have some kind of action taking place through both planning and the officers who are responsible for licensing HMOs. I think that would be incredibly helpful for us.
Yeah, I think we can pass that on to the officers and see how they'd like to go forward with it, Veronica. Would that be okay?
Yes, and on that basis, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Yes, it has been moved. Janet moved it. But there's one more person who's got his hand up. Let Hugh speak first before we go into vote.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was listening to the comments that Councillor Faye Jones made, and it is of concern. And I think other councillors has been said before in a previous planning committee, but I think in this particular instance, I don't think there's been any enforcement action taken because it would have resulted in people becoming homeless. But it is highlighting an issue, and I don't know what can be done about it because it's very difficult if people take actions to undertake these kind of conversions from residential dwellings to houses of multiple occupation without the council's prior consent or knowledge. So I don't know what can be done about that. I know it was mentioned that the letter was written to Welsh Government before, but it is difficult. And in some ways, we are reliant upon being informed that this has actually happened. So I don't know if there's any further commentary that the planning officers want to make around that. Obviously, it puts us in a difficult position because if we took enforcement action and refused a retrospective planning application, we could end up being in a position where we're potentially making people homeless, and we don't want that. I accept the points that Councillor Ashley made earlier, that that he's had first-hand experience of living in HMOs. And I think that there is a need for this type of property within the borough, because it's a kind of a stepping stone for people to, start out. If they can't get a mortgage on a property themselves, a lot of people will be dependent upon this particular type of accommodation until they can build up their financial reserves and move it forwards. But I do want to second, if it's not already been seconded, the proposed motion with the revised wording on the conditions to include the time frames for completion, as Claire mentioned earlier. But before we go to the vote, could we just have a little bit further commentary on point 1 that I just made? Thank you.
Hugh? We should take each planning application as it comes and treat them individually. So we can't just have a blanket sort of rule. Do you know what I mean? Every application is different. And I think we need to take them, as I've said, as they come individually with the advice of the officers. Is that okay, Hugh?
Yeah.
Right. It's being seconded now.
Sorry, Chair. Before you go to the vote, can I just ask, in terms of amending the conditions, is 3 months acceptable to committee?
Yes. Everybody agree with that? Yes. Claire will tweak the wording, as she put it, to 3 months. Yes. Thank you, Claire. Right. Geraint, I've got to ask you again to go through us alphabetically if they are for, against or abstaining with this application.
No problem, thank you, Chair. If I can start with Councillor Ashley.
I managed to unmic as well. For.
Councillor Bevan.
For.
Councillor Constance.
For.
Councillor Crick.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Hawler.
For.
Councillor Gaynor James.
For.
Councillor Keith James.
For.
Councillor Jenkins.
For with reservations.
Councillor Fay Jones.
Abstain.
Councillor Janet Jones.
Approve with the conditions amended by Claire.
Councillor O'Connell.
For.
Councillor Parish.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
That's 13 for and 1 abstention, Chair.
Thank you. So this application has been approved. Thank you. We'll move on now to agenda item 6. Planning application 21/P/0806 replacement roof with increased height, 1 double-storey side extension, single-storey rear and side extensions with associated works at Broomfield Cottage, Middle Coed Kai Road, Blaenavon. And I'm going to bring Richard Lewis in now at this point, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very straightforward application that would normally be dealt with under our delegated powers. The only reason we're bringing it to committee is the Constitution requires us to do that when the applicant is a member of staff of the department. So we're not proposing to present it in any way. Happy to answer any questions for members, but it's here because of the Constitution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Are there any questions or comments? Veronica?
Yes, if I could ask, and it's in connection really with the ecology, I suppose, as much as anything. The applicant is looking to put in 3 field maple trees at the southern end of the property. That looks to me as if they're going to be very close to the properties on Coed Kai Road. And I just wonder what the ecologist thinks about this, because they are trees which grow to be over 40 years, 80 years, to be about 40 feet high. And they would therefore be very close to the Coed Kai properties. I wonder if the siting of it has really been considered.
Richard, could you answer it, please?
Yeah, we have worked with the council's ecologist and tree officer on this. We are conscious of that, Councillor Crick, and we will double check that before going forward with it, if that's okay.
No, they're beautiful trees. You get wonderful canopies with them, but it does seem that they might be a bit close to those properties.
Yeah, that's certainly noted, Councillor.
Thank you.
Right, I got Janet next on my list.
I just declare a personal interest because it's in my ward, and I'm glad that it's not having a major impact on other properties as a World Heritage Town. It fits in with the location really well, and it doesn't have a derogative impact of what they're doing onto the highways either. So I would propose that we accept this application.
You're moving.
I'll second that.
Yeah. Right, and it's been seconded. Right, there are a few people who'd like to speak. So, Hugh, I think you are next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was quite pleased to see that part of the description of the development mentioned the fact that it was going to be clad in Welsh blue pennant stone. I thought that was nice, and the fact that the windows, with being an outright grey with stone sills, I think that would be very in keeping with the region. So yeah, I'm happy to support this application.
Right, thank you, Hugh. Faye, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wondered about the bats. On page 61, the ecology officer said that a bat box should be put up. I'm sure that the owners will do this. Are we sure that if a bat box is put up and where they're staying already doesn't work for the bats anymore, that they will use the bat box?
Right, thank you. Richard, can you answer this, please?
Yeah, again, there's been an ecology report on this. That's been checked with by our ecologist. And there is a condition number 5, that refers to the requirement for putting the back boxes there. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, as long as we know they will use them. That's all I was asking. I don't know enough about that.
I'm guessing the bats themselves will probably decide that. But we are
do like
doing
to
the
go
best we
back
can
to their
to
original sites.
And you can see in the dark.
Right, thank you. Right, I can't see any more hands up, and it's been moved and seconded, approved with conditions. So, Geraint, Could I ask you again to please ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they are for, against or abstaining?
No problem, Chair. Councillor Ashley?
For.
Councillor Bevan?
For.
Councillor Constance?
For.
Councillor Crick?
For.
Councillor Evans?
For.
Councillor Hawler?
For.
Councillor Gaynor-James?
For.
Councillor Keith James?
For.
Councillor Jenkins?
For.
Councillor Fay Jones?
For.
Councillor Janet Jones?
For with the conditions.
Councillor O'Connell?
For.
Councillor Parish?
For.
And Councillor Thomas?
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, Geraint. So this application has been approved. Right. Move on to agenda item 7, planning application 21/P/0840/FUL. Change existing mono-pitched roof of rear single-storey projection to dormer-style pitched roof at 58B Victoria Street, Old Cwmbran, Cwmbran. And I'll bring Richard Lewis in again for this application, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, similar to the previous application, this would normally be dealt with under our delegated powers because it's straightforward, but we are bringing it to committee because the applicant is a Torfaen councillor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Any comments or questions from members? No? Would someone like to move?
I'll move it.
I'll move it.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
All right, it's moved and seconded. Geraint, I'll have to call on you again, please, to ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they are for, against or abstaining.
No problem, Chair. Councillor Ashley?
For.
Councillor Bevan?
For.
Councillor Constance?
For.
Councillor Crick?
For.
Councillor Evans?
For.
Councillor Hawler?
For.
Councillor Gaynor-James?
For.
Councillor Keith James?
For.
Councillor Jenkins? Was that a 4, Councillor Jenkins?
Gwyn?
Sorry, I already moved it. Yeah, for. Yeah.
4, thank you. Councillor Fay Jones?
For.
Councillor Janet Jones?
For.
Councillor O'Connell?
For.
Councillor Parish?
For.
And Councillor Thomas?
For.
Thank you very much. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. This application has been approved with conditions. Right, before I close the meeting, today I have some sad news for us. I'm sorry to have to tell you that this is the last planning meeting that Paul Wheeldon will be attending. And the bad news is he's retiring. And it's a very sad loss to this committee. And he will be greatly missed. And I'd like to thank him for the huge contribution he's made to our meetings over the years. He's always put up with us with good humour and a great deal of patience. And I want to thank him sincerely and let him know how much we have appreciated him. And I know it's going to be really difficult or even impossible to replace him. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to say thank you, Paul, for the many years you have served this committee so well. And I'd like to convey our very best wishes to you for a long and happy retirement. We will miss you, Paul.
Can I say, Chair, that I didn't know whether he was retired before he retired officially? Just end up on a jolly note.
Yes. Janet, you want to say something?
Yes, totally endorse everything you said, and on behalf of the independent members of the committee, thank you, Paul. As you said, you put up with a lot of banter for us, but you've also been taking it with goodwill. You've also come and give us really strong recommendations. We will miss you, but I do endorse that you have a happy and long retirement, and we'll think of you in your lovely home in Tenerife when we are freezing in the snow.
I like to say something. Paul's put up with me going on about things as well.
as the cycling fraternity round here. I know he's rather.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, for all you've done. It's brilliant. And
Yes. And
Thank
I know
you,
all the
Paul.
members that have seen, we're really sincere about that, Paul. We will miss you.
Thank you.
Yes, he's always given so much clarity to quite knotty problems when it comes to roads and pavements. So we do appreciate it. Thank you, Paul.
I didn't know he's an expert on canals as well.
Yeah.
That's another thing we never knew about, Paul.
Perhaps if we're nice to him, he'll come back.
I doubt that very much.
I'd stay well away if I were you.
Right. Anybody else want to say anything?
Yeah, all the best in your retirement, Paul. Enjoy your well-deserved break, and echo the sentiments. Thank you very much for all your help and assistance you've afforded us over the many years. Thank you, Paul, and all the best.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Right.
Can I just say, if he does get bored in his retirement, he's welcome to come back.
Yes, that's it. He'll come back. No, I think he's had enough of us. All the best for the future, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Right, I'd like to thank everyone for you. Or were you going to say something, Paul?
No, I was just going to say thanks very much for your comments. It's much appreciated. I've been on planning committee since 1996. I think it was Bob Wellington, John Marshall, Brian Moby, yourself, Chair. And I got to be honest, I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's been a pleasure. And I mean, we give professional advice. It's down to members to make the decisions.
Yeah.
I think over the years, we've all worked together well. So thanks very much.
We have.
I'm surprised you haven't got a medal over 25 years.
You know he's going to get a roundabout named after him.
Morrison's roundabout is Wheeldon's roundabout.
What's that? I get something down at Community Council on that one.
Stuart, we'll have to remember that next time something comes up on a development.
No, that was definitely a roundabout. They get the gag. Just do that for you.
Anyway, all the best from us, Paul. Thank you for everything you've done. And I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance and contributions today. And I'll now close the meeting.
Cheers.